we love bringing Michael on to talk about what has been, and we're going to focus on what has been as it relates to Karen Read trial number 2. But we're going to use it as a springboard for learning and using it going forward. Now, just to give the folks the background on your 20 years FBI special agent. Hey, by the way, why are all FBI agents special? Why is that? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the special powers agents were given to investigate certain crimes at the beginning. Clearly, none of us are actually really that special. Actually, I had a defense attorney ask me that. There's nothing special about you except the title, right, Mr. Easter? And I was like, oh, geez, Louise, this is how we're starting.
Yeah. I'm sure the jury appreciated that.
She goes, the only person and she was like, the only person that thinks you're special is probably your mom. And I was like, man, this is talking about aggressive right away.
I know. I always did think it was kind of interesting because I thought it meant, okay, well, there's levels, but no, they're all special. Every one of them. Okay.
Yeah. Once you leave the special agent category, you'd be a supervisory special agent. And then after that, you'd start looking at executive management things, ASACs, SACs. But there's still special agent in charge, assistant special agent in charge. So the Bureau loves their specials. So
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, they do. Well, we think you're special. That's for sure.
Thank you.
And what we have tonight is kind of a learning opportunity, and you do some teaching, right?
I do. Yes.
So what we thought we would do, and this was actually Michael's idea, and we just, like I said before, we're smart enough to say, good idea. Let's do that. And so we're going to look at some of the witness testimony from Karen Read 2, 3 of the more interesting witnesses, Jenn McCabe to start off, and learn from this testimony and kind of, I guess, as those of us who are into true crime, good chance we'll be watching a trial or two in the future. Good chance we'll be looking at a witness or two in the future. And this evaluation, this analysis can make things kind of a little more interesting as we take on these new trials and everything. So let's start with Jenn McCabe. And I have here, I'm going to be the Kokomo, for those who remember the YSL trial. I'm going to be the Kokomo AV guy. Good thing I was an AV guy in high school, although I'm not pushing a projector down the hallway as I was back then. It's a little trickier now, but I'm going to do my best to keep up with the lesson plan here, sir. How you want to talk about this first clip, what we're going to see and what you want to look for, what the class should be looking for?
Yeah, my hope would be those of you that are watching live or just on rewind is that just what you said, Michael, is if you're into this sort of space of watching trials, I think you'd be interested in this topic, which is let's not necessarily, I don't think we have to rehash all of Karen Read trial testimony, but instead use it as a mechanism to look at themes that are presented to witnesses through cross-examination. And then as you watch other trials, see how those themes replicate themselves across those trials or across witnesses. And I think it might be a little more interesting, kind of, I don't want to say fun, but just an interesting way to look at trials beyond just what people are saying, but start understanding some different ways that witnesses get cross-examined and how those themes are used. And then ultimately, what I'd like to use it for is an example of, although not everybody's an expert witness and nobody would necessarily be considered a professional witness at all times, there are little things that we can do as witnesses to become more effective and just sort of deal with the examination, so to speak, by defense attorneys. It's something that I still enjoy. I still enjoy teaching this. It's one of my favorite courses to teach. And so, yeah, we have a couple of things. And I would say to the extent that you're willing to play along in the chat or maybe just at home, write down your own notes. I think it could be interesting and potentially even fun.
Okay, so what are we looking for in this first clip? What are the things you want people thinking about?
So what I'd like you to do when you watch the clip, there's 3 things I'd like you to look for is when I teach it, I teach it as themes. And these themes will be sort of a purpose or a topic for not just the question, but the series of questions that a witness will be presented by the defense attorney. If you want to write down the themes you see, I think it'll be obvious. You may not know the theme terms that I use, but I think your audience will be sophisticated enough or experienced enough to sort of kind of pick up on this first one. I'd also like you to take account, this is what I always tell students, when you hear the question, write down how you feel. Think about what it's designed to make you feel. And because the reality is, as a witness, there's really only 2 things you get to really control. And that is how you feel and what you say. Everything else is presented to you: the topics, the questions, the exhibits. You're really in control of very little, except for those two things. And then third, as you're hearing it, think about how would you respond to the question. I know you don't know the underlying answers to every question that's going to be shown here, but I think a lot of your audience is probably familiar with what the answer was, and probably the evidence as well as anybody. So think about it in that sense. How would I respond? And then we'll play the clip, and then we'll have a short discussion on it.
You stated, quote, "So I think my husband and I were talking just like about what they were doing." And then I sat back down, and then at one point I think I said hello. And then I said at 12:42, "Where are you?" And then flip. I don't know if that's my last text or if I did one more. Yeah, 12:45, hello. Because they were still there. And then question. So the dark SUV was still outside the house at 12:45. Answer, at 12:45. Do you remember that question and answer colloquy back in June of 2023?
I've been asked a number of questions, specifically that
Those
words, no.
So the question, and she's starting to answer now, critical as to that 12:45 time window, right? This was the time in which she was being asked from the first trial when she last saw Karen Reed's SUV. And of course, 12:45 makes a problem for the prosecution because it doesn't fit the rest of the timeline. So what are we getting out of this?
So question? What I want, and I know we had a little delay, and those three things I see in some of the
chats. Time to think about it.
What's the theme? What is Alan going with here? How does it make you feel? And how would you answer the question? And so that was the question that I wanted you guys to hear. The theme was at the very beginning of the question. It was a theme Alan used for a long time in his initial question with her, which is this: your prior statements, things you previously said. As a witness, as soon as you hear somebody in cross-examination start throwing things back at you that you said previously, that you testified to, you just need to be very attentive, because you want to make sure they're reading back from the transcript and not summarizing it in their own words. But the thing you need to really feel is, don't feel immediately defensive or like, oh my gosh, I did say those things. Now I need to re-clarify or retry or try to clean up things that I've said previously. Accept that that's what you said previously and just say, yes, that is what I said previously. If it's not good for you now, or it's not good for the case in chief, it's not your job to fix it right there. You're not equipped to do it with cross-examination. Wait for the prosecutor to rehabilitate the statements or help you through that process, right? And so what I'd like you to do, I'm sure if not that Michael wasn't great on this play, but I know that one was a little bit weird to hear because it started with your prior statements, but he's throwing her statements at her. And then the design is to make her feel defensive and start thinking like she's being accused of something wrong and that she needs to clarify, because she knows, I guarantee she knows at this point, that her statements from the prior trial, the timeline has migrated, and he's trying to keep her to the timeline, or at least introduce that timeline back to the jury, right? And so let's, Mike, if we play this next one, so we'll play it from 2:30 to 2:57.
And this is basically her answer to that question.
Right. And I want you to listen now, thinking about what I just said. How does she answer it? And then we'll just discuss maybe a better response to this type of questioning.
I've been asked a number of questions, specifically those words, no. I do remember testifying. I believe I said, I think, in there. I think that, and to be honest, I'm not sure of exactly the times. I didn't pay close attention to when I was texting and when I was sitting. I was going back and forth to the door.
But in June of 2023,
so she's back and forth,
right.
trying to explain how she could be so different, version 2 from version 1.
Right. And what's interesting about this question for the audience is he didn't ask you if you had a new opinion. He just asked, did you say that previously? Right. He's not asking you whether it's true. He's not asking whether it's still accurate or whether it's still your opinion. He's just asking, did you previously state this? And she's already giving qualifying words. Well, I think I said, I think. Those may not have been my words exactly. Well, he's reading this to you, right? So somebody said these are your words. So what I'd like to point out in this instance, think how different the answer would be or the exchange would be for the jury if you just said, yes, I did say that previously, or yes, that is consistent with my prior statements. Now, I don't look like I'm trying to defend it. It doesn't look like I'm trying to make sense of it in the present, or in her case, trying to distance herself. She's already qualifying that it may be wrong, right? Oh, well, I don't know if those words are accurate. I don't know if I say I think. Those are things you really want to avoid as a witness at the very beginning. This is her first couple questions with Alan, and she's already trying to score some points for her new testimony. Just say yeah.